Donkey Kong Country is widely regarded as one of the defining games of the Super Nintendo library. It arrived at both the peak of the Super Nintendo's reign over the 16-bit era and the peak of the 2D platformer as a genre. With slick modern graphics, excellent gameplay, and the backing of a bananas marketing campaign, it should come as no surprise that the game is one of the best-selling titles on the Super Nintendo. But has it withstood the test of time? Let's find out on Blaze Plays Retro Games. Donkey Kong Country was developed by Rare under the wing of Nintendo and hyped with a massive marketing campaign before its release in 1994. To give you an idea of what the marketing was like, we had this VHS tape randomly show up in our mailbox one day called Donkey Kong Country Exposed, where this guy goes to the Nintendo of America office and talks to a bunch of people working on the game. I'll drop a link down in the description, because if you have any interest in Donkey Kong Country, you really should watch this video.
Yeah.
You want a banana?
No thanks. So, what do we got to eat here?
Well, today we got the cream of banana soup, the banana and peanut butter sandwich, fried green bananas, bananas au gratin.
So much game marketing of the 90s consisted of nothing more than a logo and some screenshots in a magazine ad, or lame attempts at being edgy. But Donkey Kong Country Exposed broke the mold. It shows off the personality of the team working on the game in a format that you would have expected to see on public access, but it was actually really effective. I really was hyped for the game, and I did want a banana. Donkey Kong Country Exposed, as well as the more traditional marketing for the game, put a ton of emphasis on the graphics, and for good reason, because the graphics they were previewing were better than anything that had been seen on a home console up to that point. This is due to both the artistic style used by the artists at Rare, and the fact they created the sprites for the game using pre-rendered 3D models. It's not like 3D games didn't exist at the time when Donkey Kong Country was being developed, but full-on real-time 3D was incredibly primitive, and generally rendered at a low frame rate, while pre-rendered 3D graphics were more often completely static in games like Myst. But Rare decided to take a different route with Donkey Kong Country. Video game artists traditionally drew sprites pixel by pixel and frame by frame, which was painstaking and time consuming as the artist had to draw each frame of each character, often at all sorts of different angles for each and every animation. We know this can look amazing when done well, but it has its limitations. There is only so much time and money for artists to draw these animations, and it is very difficult to create the illusion of movement when animating by hand with very few frames. For Donkey Kong Country, the artists generated and animated 3D models, rendered these animations at a high frame rate, then generated 2D sprites from those renderings. Because they were not drawing the sprites by hand and had more frames from which to generate the sprites, they were able to make each sprite frame represent more of the frames which were present in the original high frame rate 3D animation. In essence, they were creating sprites with high quality motion blur, and as a result achieved a higher quality illusion of movement. Filmmakers use a similar technique with their cameras to generate motion blur on each individual frame, which is what gives film its smooth cinematic feel. But once the game came out, the gaming world found out that it wasn't just hype and marketing, the graphics really were that good, without any stuttering, slowdown, or snail's pace frame rates. The character animations were smooth and matched the movement of the characters through the environment, even when you were moving quickly. When combined with the gameplay, the techniques used to generate the sprites gave the game a cinematic feel, like it was more than just a game. The layering techniques used for the scenery gave the world depth, which really shines in the world Gorilla Glacier when the Kongs get caught in a blizzard. They did an amazing job of making the platforming aspects of the game easily distinguishable from the scenery itself, which is a pitfall that so many developers failed to avoid back then. There are so many retro games that are difficult to play because everything on the screen just melts together or is just plain boring. I think with Donkey Kong Country, Rare managed to set a new bar when it came to 2D graphics, which largely wasn't challenged once 3D graphics became the standard. While the graphics of Donkey Kong Country might not be mind-boggling by today's standards, one part of the game that does still hold up is the soundtrack. Each track has its own unique style, which captures and enhances the mood of the level it's on, but the composer still managed to maintain a central style connecting the soundtrack as a whole, despite this diversity. You really feel like you're in an ancient temple, in a massive cavern, or deep in the jungle. The track that accompanies underwater levels, Aquatic Ambience, has taken on a life of its own since the game's release, and is often regarded as the best track on the Super Nintendo. Besides the graphics and soundtrack, this game has so many little touches that show just how much thought Rare put into the feel of playing the game. It really feels like they just thought of everything. It's an incredibly intuitive game to play, with simple and responsive controls. The gameplay itself is so smooth, it feels like you can just play the entire game without stopping once. And simultaneously, there are so many times where you just want to stop altogether and enjoy the scenery. And you can. Without a level timer or point system, you're essentially free to just play the game without worrying about how long you're taking or what you're doing. There's lives, of course, but the game is so generous with handing them out that it's not something you really need to think about while you're playing. Another little touch that I absolutely love is that Donkey Kong Country eliminates the typical on-screen interface almost entirely, which really helps contribute to the cinematic feel. Rather than a huge chunk of the screen being taken up at all times by a timer, a life counter, a power meter, item trackers, health bars, and God knows what else, you simply get a little pop-in when you collect something, and it drifts back out of view almost immediately. And the great part is, you don't even really have to collect anything. You're not forced to collect the bananas or find the bonus levels, and anything you do find or collect just contributes to getting you more lives. This all ties together into a sort of feature minimalism that was really a super fresh antithesis to the Mario platforming series, and is a huge part of the overall aesthetic of the game. So much of what makes Donkey Kong Country great is not just what it does, but what it doesn't do. The game doesn't bombard you with information, it doesn't force you to collect anything, it doesn't require you to memorize enemy formations, it doesn't force you to grind out experience points, it doesn't make you sit through long and poorly written cutscenes. While experienced gamers might not find the game difficult, I remember having a tough time as a kid getting to Candy Kong's save point in Gorilla Glacier. The ice rope sections in Slip Slide Ride are brutal, as is the platforming on narrow slippery ledges in Ice Age Alley. The fact that Donkey Kong Country does without many popular features of successful games, is both audio-visually beautiful and innovative, and also manages to actually be fun to play, is an impressive achievement. These aspects of the game just mesh together into something bigger and better than you would expect from each individual part, and I think a lot of people fail to fully appreciate how difficult that is from a design standpoint. It's really no surprise that for the remainder of the time Rare worked as a developer for Nintendo, you could essentially guarantee the next game they put out was going to be just as excellent as the last. They were just good developers. It's not like Rare revolutionized the platformer with Donkey Kong Country, but I think viewing the game as just another platformer is a mistake. The game and its marketing did a really great job of capturing what felt cool at the time, and I think this is something that might not be obvious to someone who didn't grow up back then. While Donkey Kong himself might be a bit of a square, Diddy and Funky both have the vibe of what it meant to be cool in 1994. Even the color palette reflects the popular style of the time and is somewhat of a departure from many other games which were stuck in the 80s, with washed out colors and neons. Donkey Kong Country features deep blacks, off-whites, and colors that remain simplistic despite being ultra-saturated. It might not have the brutality of other cool games from the time like Doom and Mortal Kombat, but it doesn't need it. It's got substance in a lot of areas where those games have very little. A video game being cool for a reason other than adult themes like graphic violence was somewhat novel at the time, but within a year of the release of Donkey Kong Country, Sega and Sony were releasing the Saturn and PlayStation respectively in the US, with marketing heavily leaning into their console being the cool console. Nintendo would largely shy away from cultivating a cool image, but by the time the PlayStation 2 was dominating the market with games like the Grand Theft Auto series, gaming had shed most of its uncool imagery anyways and become a mainstream hobby. I think that the hype for Donkey Kong Country was warranted back in the day, and that 90s gamers got it right with this one. I think it's still worth the time today, and if you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend giving it a shot. Thanks for tuning in to Blaze Plays Retro Games.